Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the December 16th, 2020 meeting of the Abington Finance Committee. We have a decent agenda tonight, but hopefully not anything that will take a super long time for us. We have a few guests with us tonight. We have our town manager, Scott Lambiase. Scott, welcome. We have our assistant town manager and finance director, Sue Moquin. And we have our fire chief, John Nuttall, with us again tonight. We feel like we're tapping you for information quite frequently at our meetings lately.
It's okay.
Sorry to take up an evening for you, but definitely have a good item to discuss with you. So why don't we, out of respect for the chief's time, why don't we jump that to the top of the list and discuss the chief's plan about doing COVID testing in town. John or Sue or Scott, I don't know who would like to kind of take the lead on explaining what's going on with that and what the ask to the committee is.
I think John should go.
Yeah, I'll jump right in for you. So what we're looking at, what the fire department is looking at is the Abington Fire Department is exploring the possibility of limited COVID testing in town. And the key word on this really has to be understood that it's limited. I don't believe that our department has the sufficient personnel, certainly not the facility, to be able to provide a service of a large testing facility or testing site for all of the residents. That's not where we're going. I believe that's beyond our capability. However, we do feel that we would be within the realms of having the possibility of trying to have a limited testing, PCR testing, to at least try to keep some of the town essential services operational. And I can explain that because we're kind of in a certain sweet spot as to what point we could do that. We don't necessarily want to do the individual small ones, although we could. However, that may not be as cost effective as sending them to a local clinic. We may be able to do moderate to larger limited testing sites should there be a need for that. The goal is to have a rapid turnaround PCR test to lessen employee quarantines for departments if we're able to do that. We're able to get our tests back within 12 to 15 hours. And we've already tested that on a few of our employees and families just as a small testing group to test the system, and it is working. We want this, number one, to be safe and cost efficient for the entire town, and certainly for our employees. They've got to be safe doing this. And that also dictates where the cost can come from, because we have to have a certain number of employees present if we're going to be conducting this. And again, the scope of this moderate groups, not the entire town. So the process on this, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, would it be specifically aimed at town employees, or would it be open past that? Okay.
I can
Sorry, I'm jumping.
No, that's okay. So I got a few subcategories here. So the process of this, and we're mostly there, is we have to train our members that are interested in this. We're beginning that process now. We've already got 1 or 2 of our members that already went through the training on a trial basis. Now we're ready to open that up to the entire department. And we're trying to get this done immediately because we can cover that cost under the CARES Act while we still have that. We've already got a memorandum of agreement from the health agent as well as our medical director. That's done. I'm working now with the fire union for an MOA from them. And we're pretty close, I think, where we need to be with that. And we've already got a good established relationship with our vendor, who will be they'll be supplying the actual testing kits. And then they will pick up the testing kits once they have been administered to patients. They bring them to a lab in Cambridge, and then we get the results back within 12 to 15 hours, which is the goal. That could change depending on the number of tests that are going on at any given time, but that's pretty much been the area we're able to do. And that's much shorter, I think, than some of the other PCR tests that are out there.
So what do we, sorry, I was just going to ask what we pay per test right currently.
We're able to get the actual test for about $45. I think to send employees to local clinics, it's anywhere between $100 to $165. However, we also would need some labor to be able to do this. So for smaller individual testing of 1 or 2 people, it may be more cost effective to send them to an established site, to send them to one of the clinics or whatever in town. If we wanted to test a larger group, for whatever reason, it may be more cost effective to have us do it at that point.
So yesterday, the FDA approved an at-home test that you can take for $30. And so it might be worth looking into that. Maybe we can just purchase a bunch of those and test people that way, right? And that way no one has to administer the test. It's all done privately at home. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's
There's
a
a
different
number
kind of
of
test, though.
rapidly changing, the whole environment, as you know, has been rapidly changing on this anyway. Either way, and I'm going to kind of request afterwards, through Sue and Scott, and I bounced off of Sue earlier, whatever, regardless of what the town may choose to go forward with the type of testing, at some point, I don't believe the insurance is paying for these. So my suggestion to Sue was today, and again, this is for your committee to discuss, is because the CARES Act basically ceases December 30th, I don't believe there's going to be an extension of that unless something has changed. So basically Abington's on its own for any funding of this after January 1st. Right up to now, we've been able to cover most of the costs COVID related in town under the CARES Act. I'm going to defer to Sue or Scott on that momentarily. They're going to have more information on that if needed. I'm looking, is there a way we could almost as a community have a smaller version of an Abington CARES Act just to kind of at least keep the essential employees, the testing available, or if there's any other minor COVID-related expenses that may come up on that. And that's what I was going to propose, whether we do, whatever type of testing we do, whether we do some of our own, whether we do some local ones, whether we purchase ones. I think there may be a whole menu of options out there, but ultimately it would have to be funded. I was going to humbly suggest, and again, this is for your committee, and I don't know where the funds are in the town because I think they're in your agenda, is if we established a fund of a certain amount of money that would be ideally administered from the town accountant's office. Not that I want to add more work to them because I know they're already busy, but I think that would be the proper way to do this. So if my department or another town department, we're not holding that whole fund, it would be going through their department as we're doing now with the CARES Act. That may be able to, in a limited capacity, limp us along until hopefully this thing goes away.
But are we talking about testing everybody just, on a regular interval, or are we saying testing people only if they have symptoms or that kind of thing, or have been exposed?
Based
The
on
fire
contact
department
tracing.
at this point would be looking at only testing, minimum Abington fire employees, possibly some families, or if a fire department family member is symptomatic, at that point now we're quarantining our employees because of the contaminate, it's been a long day.
Exposure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I knew that word would come because of the exposures, the contract tracing. So, the ultimate goal is to try to get our employees back so that they're not quarantined needlessly, if that was the case. That's the ultimate goal on this whole thing, is to try to save money because it's expensive when the employees are out. Because we
And
have
you must
to
be
cover their
running
shifts.
into that. How often are you running into people having to quarantine? Because every
We've
time
run into it sporadically, and this really done a good job kind of keep an eye on that. We've got a great EMS coordinator that's really administered that. And we've done it, I think, very cost effective and efficiently, however, safely. We don't want to bring somebody in here potentially exposing the entire department needlessly. So we've run into it several times throughout the year, and we've been able to cover all of that under the current CARES Act. The question that somebody just posted, and I apologize, I didn't get your name, sir, is the goal is not for my department, it would not be for the fire department to test everybody in town. We simply don't have that capability. We don't have that We don't have enough manpower to do that. We could do a couple of spikes here and there. If we had to test like a moderate sized group once in a while, I think we could, because we have to set up a large testing site, and that's very labor intensive. We don't have the facility here. This would have to be in an outside, basically a drive up type site that you've seen around. And we could set something up like that, we feel confident, but we could not do this all the time. There's a couple of communities that are running these almost around the clock, much larger departments. We're not in that realm.
Would you be able to, I mean, I'm just thinking of people in town as far as employees that probably have the most exposure are first responders, so fire and police. Would that be something you could be able to test the fire personnel
Police
and
as
the
well.
police personnel?
Yes and no. It may actually be more cost effective if it's just one individual to just send them up to one of the local clinics, because
I don't mean on a regular basis. I meant,
Right, like if there was an event or something of that nature.
correct. If there was like an entire shift or like, a quarter or percentage of the department, yeah, we could test them all at one time. If it's just 1 or 2 employees, it may not be cost effective for us to do that.
You said it's not, this isn't covered by insurance, but when I had my test, it was covered by insurance.
I am not sure. We've heard conflicting reports on that some are, some aren't.
depending, I think, on your insurance. I know that my own insurance, they require you to be contact traced and for you to have symptoms to pay for a rapid test.
Oh, okay.
But to cover the regular test, the different,
PCR.
yes, to cover the regular test, that can come back in the 24 hours, or depending on how backed up they are. Insurance is covering that.
Oh, okay, that's what
If you're contact traced, they cover that. And then I think it's just individual insurances, like if you just decide one day that you want to go and get tested, or I don't know how that works. Like if you want to travel, if you have to pay, I've heard upwards of $180 for the rapid test if you don't have symptoms and haven't been contact traced, but say you just wanted to travel.
That happened to me. I had to travel for work. It was $165 at the Express Clinic.
Health Express.
Health Express, yeah, thanks.
the speed of this sounds much improved, because around here, anywhere from 3 to 6 days to get results back.
Yeah, it depends on which place you're going. I know
Right. Yeah.
my son had contact tracing, and he had to test, and went over to the one at Massasoit and got the results back in just over 24 hours. So.
The one in Health Express was like 10 minutes. They did a nose swab and they came right back out.
Oh, wow.
Told me, yeah,
That's the rapid test.
yeah.
And that's why you had to pay. If you don't have symptoms and you haven't been contact traced, you do have to
Yep.
pay.
Got it. Okay. So are we talking about getting enough to cover all town employees? Is that the idea? Or are we saying just specifically the fire department?
I don't think that all town employees was the idea, correct, Chief?
Correct. And really, it's on an as-needed basis. This wouldn't be, let's just go test everybody. It's really whether, if you're symptomatic, if you've had a possible exposure, that pretty much the trigger points right now that would require somebody to be quarantined. We're trying to limit that quarantine if that's possible. Because there's also a built-in, there's an incubation period. If I'm exposed today from a patient that was known positive, and if I didn't have my personal protective gear on for whatever reason, shame on me. But if that were to happen, it does me no good to go get an immediate test, because you need a 5 to 7 day incubation period before you can get the test. If you opt not to get the test, for whatever reason, then you're looking at a quarantine period, and they've actually just changed that last week. They've somewhat reduced that quarantine period unless you're symptomatic. It's kind of a moving scale on where you're at any given point on this.
Yeah, it could be anywhere from 7 days to 14 days that you have to quarantine, depending on whether you get a negative test, when you had that test, when your last exposure was.
And,
But my
and
concern,
oh, go
my
ahead.
concern for the fire department is if we have 1 or 2 employees that either were positive or, possibly contaminated, and then they're beginning to cross-contaminate other or affect other employees here, I could literally look at almost half this department almost immediately going out if it was at a change of shift. And I've seen this happening in some of the area town departments as well. It's certainly a concern that the fire chiefs are having. So really the goal on this is to try to reduce that quarantine period as quick as we could, because I could have, anywhere from 6 to 12 employees out in quarantine, and there may be nothing wrong with them, but because they have to wait whatever time period, half your department is shut down at that point. And we're gonna do what we can to fill those shifts, but now you're going into a burnout period for the remaining half that have to work everything. So we're trying to do what we can to avoid that.
So is there a specific amount of money that we need to appropriate for this?
So I had a couple of questions that's kind of part of, Justin. First was, like, how many tests would we be looking at, or would we sort of be looking at? Because I assume that it's not like we purchase a kit, like the test as a kit, and we pay for it in advance. It's more of we're paying as we're using the lab and the resources to perform the test. So I think the questions are how many tests would we want to have the capability of doing between now and the end of the fiscal year, and depending on Sue's answer about the chief's idea of sort of a mini fund, like a mini CARES Act type of fund for the rest of the departments in the town, on what kind of a total we would be looking at for something like this.
And this is the unknown question. And I've been working back and Sue with this, and it's difficult because it's an unknown. Basically, the cost of the test, and Matt, you're absolutely correct. The only cost incurred is the actual lab work. We've already got a number of tests on hand. We're ready to go. As we use those tests and submit them to have the lab do it, at that point, that's where the $45 per test comes in. If we were going to be using labor to administer the test, we're looking at a minimum of 2 paramedics to administer the test, because we're doing these off-site. We don't have the facility to do it here. That limits us. We want to make sure that that they're kind of covered with that. There's costs that come into that. So how many tests we'd have to do, I do not know. That's an unknown. We could do 10 tests. We could do 1,000 tests. If we did 1,000 tests, you're looking at $45,000 just for the test. And then you're looking at, probably more than twice that for labor. So you're up into $100,000 roughly. This is completely theoretical. We may do no testing because this is an unknown to us. We don't really know how many tests we would potentially have to do. We don't really know where this virus could be going, right? We're seeing a spike right now. I think today's numbers in Abington kind of looks like they descended slightly, but we're also going with more holidays again. So I actually would defer to Marty on that answer, but he's not here. So I don't have a number of tests to give you. And so that means, therefore, I don't really have an actual dollar figure for you.
I have a quick question if no one else does.
Go ahead, Barbara.
More for Sue, I guess. Sue, the Board of Health and the visiting nurse service that we contract to, do they do any testing?
So currently they do not. They send everybody over to the Health Express. We've got a vehicle. We're trying to get the test in, but it's actually a joint thing between the Board of Health and the fire department. They're working together on this project.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Board of Health, actually, they're stretched thin as it is just on their contact tracing that they have to do.
Yes, I was just wondering about the visiting nurse services that we contract to for like flu shots and.
We don't contract to visiting nurse services anymore. We hired a public health nurse.
Right, yep, sorry.
Right, but yeah, unfortunately, her services, which she's well over, working well over what we've hired her for as far as time. She is spending quite a bit of her time also doing contact tracing. They all are in that department. What's going to happen after the 30th is anybody's guess, is particularly with that public health nurse, because we've been able to, track these expenses going up to this point and really right up until December 30th on a lot of the hours and the extra time that has gone into this.
As far as using the CARES Act, you mean?
Yeah, and that's all going to end, and there's zero indication on which way it's going to go.
Right.
So we don't know. A program like this is probably good. I think it in theory, if something was to come through where we wanted to get a shift at the fire department or a shift at the police department, run through a program like this because something happened and we need to get a good amount of people done really fast, it makes perfect sense.
Right.
I can't imagine we'd ever be in a scenario where we'd want to do thousands of people or hundreds of people, but certainly I think it's certainly we need a go ahead to do this. But the unfortunate thing is after the 30th and certainly going into the first of next year, we'll have no safety net as far as Coronavirus Relief Act goes. So we have healthy reserves, as you know, but we don't know what else is coming our way. This is an important thing, though, that I don't think it'll cost as much, is maybe running through everybody's heads if you're looking at doing thousands of people. But certainly, if I could see the scenario coming up where we would ask them to maybe stand up and we would do half the police department for some strange reason. The good part is the frontline workers are, likely to, sometime next month or February, be vaccinated. So I think, as time goes by and we get further into the first quarter, this threat lessens and lessens and the need for it. But we certainly should be prepared for it. Which that's, hats off to John, because thank you, because these guys always are prepared for whatever can go wrong. So
The person administering the test is a fire department employee?
It'd be paramedics, yes,
Paramedic. So they're a fire department employee.
correct.
So how many places are there in Abington to get tested? Like, is it just Health Express or are there others as well? Or people can get tests? I'm just wondering if we can kind of negotiate with one of these places and, buy a bulk few of them to be used as needed so that we're not using, hours of EMT time or paramedic time or that kind of thing for this. Like, we just use them as needed and we're not spending extra on labor, that kind of thing.
You can
I
talk
think
to
that we
Kate.
have. I think that Marty already has an agreement with them. I'm not familiar with the specifics on that, and I don't want to speak too much on that, but I think that there is an agreement. The benefit of having the fire department kind of is a backup, because I think the primary testing thing on this for one or two individuals as we go probably is using the Health Express or whatever vendor. The plan B for the fire department doing it is twofold. I think we can do larger testing if we had to. If there was a larger group, we would be able to do that, because we do have the equipment and the manpower and the training to be able to have set up a larger drive-through testing. We can't do this all the time, but there are times we would be able to do it. The other benefit is we have control over this, because we would like to have at least a backup so that should something happen to a local vendor for whatever reason, if they go out, we've lost that. This is an excellent plan B.
So Matt, we just, Chief, to you through Matt, other communities, area communities, are you aware and familiar with the Hanover project? And their funding source principally started with CARES funds and now funded by the community as a basis. And their primary focus was supporting schools and working with other area local establishments, businesses in the community as that backup, yes. But if you're aware of the Hanover project, maybe the group would benefit from hearing how another local town used its fire service to support its community needs and interests.
We're very familiar with Hanover, and we looked very closely at Hanover. And they've got a great operation. I don't have the staff that Hanover does, and they are spending, I believe, a lot of money on what the project that they're doing. They're running this nonstop out of their fire station. I don't have that facility to do that. Neither one of my stations would be realistic for that. We looked at that. So their location, number one, works. We'd have to set up a different site. And they have a larger day staff that they're doing it, but they're supplementing that with off-duty people. I believe Hanover is spending a lot of money on that project.
So I think I was driving more to the point. They put out an RFP for testing material and media, right? Because part of testing is you have the physician and clinical oversight validating the test that's being done. You have a high complexity lab that's actually running the test, and you have the staff that's actually organizing and operationalizing those sites. So when you look at all the pieces, parts together, and I'm not quite certain what the budget amount was, and I apologize for my tardiness, it really just does come down to is there isn't enough testing in Massachusetts as a whole. And when you look at the notions of buying things in bulk, you have lab capacity, and there's no guarantee of lab capacity, and you need to have a lab MSA. You need to have a physician who's willing to sign the electronic requisitions and go through their version of either telehealth or assessment, or do so through delegation of the providers on scene. And you need to ensure that you're doing the resulting in follow-up and counseling, right? So a testing program is more than just putting swabs in nostrils. It's fairly complex insofar as each piece part. Full disclosure, I am very well aware of the Hanover program because I worked with Deputy Chief Cavallaro to create it and build it and get its approvals. So I do understand the complexity behind it. So if the town wants to help and take care of itself, I celebrate the fact that the town wants to help and celebrate itself. And the better question would be is how do we help it do that? So if the chief is looking for a little extra dough to make that happen, then it's a smart investment in the community's interests.
Although I definitely want to be clear, it's not in our interest, or I think, well, not interest, but it's not really realistic for us to really duplicate what Hanover is doing. I don't have the staffing for that. I don't see that as a possibility for Abington that Hanover is doing. I simply don't have the staffing to constantly run that, as well as fill the vacant shifts that we have now and maintain our call volume. So I want to be crystal clear on this. I don't believe we can do what Hanover is doing with the size fire department you have in Abington right now.
Sorry, I think I did miss the beginning part, and I apologize for being late. Vaccines are coming. What is the plan for staffing for the model of it if you're not going to use your own guys?
We would be using our own guys if we're setting up for a larger testing site, like a drive-up site. We're looking at minimum 2 up to 3, depending on how many we'd be doing, how many tests we'd be administering to be able to run that. You're pretty much setting up a hot zone, a warm zone, and a cold zone with different trained employees to prevent cross-contamination of them. We're probably looking at setting up an outside type of a drive-up type facility, not something in the building. You have the benefit of having a great facility in there already with able staff. We don't have that in our stations. It's simply not a possibility. So we'd be looking at, again, more of a moderate sized if we were to do it.
So like the Naval Air Base tent that I set up and ran back in March, or something smaller than that?
Probably smaller in scale.
And for the benefit of Sean and Katie, who were not on at the time, essentially the chief is looking for the ability to do something on more of an as needed basis if, say, an entire shift of firefighters or an entire shift of police officers were to all have contact tracing, like be hit by contact tracing at the same time. So that we would be able to turn things around and get them back on shift more
Forgive
quickly.
my ignorance, but I thought that they couldn't be contact traced because they're considered first responders, and per the CDC, any healthcare worker isn't contact traced. As long as we're not symptomatic, we can still work masked. Not that COVID is
Does
rampant.
that make sense? 'Cause you can, but does it make sense?
We're being very cautious because I can't afford to risk the entire department.
So
I'm very well aware of what came out from the state. I believe the state guidelines totally counter what the CDC guidelines are.
just
I do
curious
know-
for education, for understanding.
I know in Brockton, my nephew's a firefighter in Brockton. One of his group members tested positive, and within a week, they were all positive.
So how do we figure out how many, I mean, like you said, with vaccines coming, we've got maybe 2 months worth of time before that could happen, right? For the first responders. So we need to think about what it would cost to get the number of tests that you might take within that time frame, and then budget for that. Is that the idea?
I apologize again because I missed it. What was the platform for testing, and do we have a pricing pro forma for like what the lab's going to be charging us, and then the cost of the manpower to determine the price of test? Like, are we using the Broad, or is there a special contract set up with Quest for like the VIP turnaround? Are we getting into a priority program with LabCorp? Like, I guess just a better understanding, because the pricing can vary from $35 to $95 depending on the lab and the priority program that's set for the town.
We're looking at $45.
Is the other one, I think.
We're looking at $45 for the test itself. They're giving us all of the test kits and that upfront, but it's really the processing of it. And that fee is $45. Plus it would be, probably a couple of man hours of a personnel cost to administer it.
Do we know what the personnel cost is going to be? Like, I think Stop the Spread's paying like $25 to $35 an hour for lay people to do the swabbing. They don't have to be a paramedic or healthcare professional. So do we have a determination of labor costs plus, like to stand up a tent is $6,000 plus, to heat those tents gets costly.
We have a incident support trailer that we'd be using for our personnel that's heated. There's a generator with it. So, we don't have the tent, possibly a tent for the vehicles. And it would be the contractual overtime rates that each individual gets.
Which is, do we have a broad estimate of what that is?
An average is about $50 an hour.
So we'll be paying above tent testing standards for industry tent testing hourly rates.
It's just an idea we're trying to help the community. I mean, we can't compete with the private.
And then do we have a medical director to result the positives in contact, and then what's the notification process to the community, not only the people who are tested, but for, to get it into Maven so that the Board
That's
of
where the Board of Health, the Abington Board of Health will be doing that. And we do have our medical director that's already signed off on it.
So, it just sounds like we're recreating the wheel for something that's in existence with partners who are doing this throughout the state. So sorry, I'm just trying to understand the process better.
We're just looking to be able to provide a good backup, if you will, for the town. And in the beginning, again, you may not have been here earlier, but we said from the beginning, it is probably more cost effective to send them to the local clinic on individuals. We're looking more again for the moderate sized if we had to test larger groups of people.
Absolutely. I think town programs are great and they're so important, especially since we're probably still in this for another 6, 9, 12 months. But, you know, it's just important to understand because it gets extremely costly to run.
So given
What
the
do we have as a
discussion,
ballpark figure?
sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
What do we have as a ballpark figure to be able to roll that out?
Again, I think it depends on the number of people we'd be testing, and that's an unknown that we don't have.
No, I mean, what number would we be looking to set aside? What would be the amount that we'd be looking to put toward that program?
That I'd probably defer to either you or Suzanne with. I'm just to throw a figure out there, maybe 50 to 100,000, but I have no idea what the town has in reserves, and I'm not trying to spend your money. And if that was something, if it's used, fine. If it's not used, it just reverts back. That may give you a large enough umbrella that would give not just the fire department, but any town department that has any CARES Act type expenses going forward for the next, few months to the end of the fiscal year, at least a little bit of breathing room to kind of continue an Abington version of the CARES Act.
Right.
Don't have to use my figure whatsoever. I'm just throwing that out there as a starting point.
Thank you.
Or even if you
So-
wanted it to be specific, even if you wanted it just to be specific of his program, to maybe put 25, and if we needed to come back like in March or April or May, then be aware that you guys know that we have the program going and we might come back for more.
That makes sense.
But the scope is still a little strange to me, right? So we're saying it's only going to be for the fire department. How many people are in the fire department?
Well, I don't think he's saying just the fire department. I mean, I think it's fire department, police department, anybody who,
Yeah.
who's in a cluster, that work really close together, and something happens to somebody in that department. Like, I know we're being recorded, but right now the senior center's closed because a few of their family members have but tested positive. So being in close contact, the whole senior center's closed. So we would have the opportunity to test the people in the senior center to make sure that they're okay to go back to work and work with the seniors. So
Right.
I know he's talking fire department, but it's for the most part clusters of employees to take care of the employees to make sure that we're serving the community. Am I right, John?
Yes, it's not just for the fire department. We certainly can do the fire department, but it would be the fire department administering this and working in conjunction with the Board of Health for the tracking and the MAVIS, and as you said.
It makes sense to me. That's just my opinion, to have this type of safety net with the CARES Act money going away. And such a high potential to have any of those scenarios where a whole shift, either from the fire department or a whole shift from the police department, having to quarantine and waiting for testing, definitely
And if
put the town in a precarious situation.
And if you think about it, if a town employee becomes positive or a family member becomes positive, we work for the town. It's our responsibility to take care of those employees if they come in contact with other employees. If I came positive because of my family member, then I would stay home and I wouldn't, affect my other employees. But if for some reason I didn't know, then and I came into work and all of a sudden I became positive, well, then I infected our employees. Our employees should really be taken care of.
No, I guess my point is we've got places people can get tested in town. So it seems like kind of like to Katie's point, like we don't need to have another place, we can just use the places that already exist to do this, right? That's kind of my point. I mean, it seems like you're adding extra costs by having additional people to be there to administer the tests when we can just run to Health Express and get those done there, right?
I have
I
an
think this
employee
is for
who,
the, sorry.
I have an employee who's going to get tested, and she has to wait until Friday, and then she has to wait whatever, 48, 72 hours. Our program would allow us to have the results within the day so that we can say the rest of our employees are safe. So it's a rapid, quicker program. And I know Health Express does have that, but I think there's certain people that are like Marty got me in there a couple weeks ago under the quick rapid express, but you know, I have other people that I've known that work for the town that, okay, go take your test, and they've waited almost 3 or 4 days to get the results back while we're concerned about whether or not their employees or other people that they've come in contact with within the town, including residents, that we need to notify them, but we're waiting 4 days to get our tests. So this is just a matter of getting it faster than what we're getting from some of the healthcare providers.
And I think too, that sometimes you're having to wait for the appointment just because the numbers are up. And so people, a lot more people are being contact traced. And so the numbers are up. And so more people are going to get tested, and, you know, there's only so much capacity. So you might not be able to get an appointment for 3 or 4 days.
Just for
Katie,
the
you were
record,
going to say
my
something.
questions are not Health Express questions. Like, there is not enough testing in the state. There is a shortage everywhere. So I just want to go on the record that, but I do think that there's a cost-effective way to do it, and you know, we have to be mindful that you know, there's efficient and cost-effective ways to do it, and in that if we can offer our expertise, and communities, our neighboring communities that we're partners with are doing this already effectively. So I think that those are good resources to rely on as well as we fact find and try to put together a plan.
Yeah, Katie, I was gonna say, we do have in both you and Sean excellent resources. I have no idea of your time commitments and if you would be able to work with the chief at all or offer him any guidance or advice. But I do feel like we have a very good idea of something that would be beneficial to the town. I don't feel like we have it fleshed out to the point where we know what it would cost and we know what it would necessarily entail to provide a specific sum of money for it. We could look to, as the chief was saying, set aside with Sue kind of a baseline sum, knowing that it might come back for more, but then work with neighboring communities, work with people like Katie and Sean who have a lot of expertise in the area and in the specifics to try and find the right solution for Abington specifically.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I can just offer two points. The sum of $25,000 is the same as testing 556 individuals. The current state daily production of tests is at 97,000 tests per day. The site at Massasoit is seeing over 500 sites, various other drive-through. I don't know what Ms. Comas's experiences are. My point being is that 25,000 is going to go fast just in the cost of the lab. So the strong, urgent suggestion and the advice that I've given to other towns, other folks after having the experience of building a daily capacity of about 22,000 tests per day and working with about 6 different lab providers and understanding the turnaround. I'm amazed, John, congratulations if you got a lab to turn around within the same day. Quite honestly, that's fantastic. The Broad doesn't turn around in the same day. So whoever the lab happens to be, good for you. Don't tell anybody, sign that agreement and keep it, because it is, unless it's going to be a point of care PCR test that's not an RT-PCR, it's just an antigen test, I can't see that turnaround. But that aside, what we're trying to say is if it doesn't cost an untold amount of money, we just figure it out. let's just put a quick pro forma together. We can say, hey, the town's, Hingham is paying $140 for some outside company to come in and do drive-through testing over at the shipyard, right? That was in the Patriot Ledger. Brookline does the same. Hanover decided to insource it. We have stop the spread sites that are running currently at 27 different locations across the state. We have various testing options that exist throughout the state. Honestly, it's smart for the town to try to take care of itself. I just feel that from a financial view, all we as a group get to say is yes or no, we agree to spend the money and we'll advocate for that. So the process of the program, how you've already put all that energy and details, because you traditionally come to this group with everything together. So I think here's the idea and the concept. I would push back to Scott, Sue, and the chief and say, can you just give us a draft pro forma and say, this is what we anticipate with what is currently known today. It's clear that the community buys into it. It makes sense from at least the leadership side. And if it gives better color, then that's fine, because you have some savings that are just, you have savings, you're not actually adding any extra overhead. You're only adding direct cost of labor. So what is that direct cost of labor and what is the direct cost of the incremental stuff of the PPE, tiny, and then what is the lab processing piece and then any of the other outsourced side. And if we look at the system and we just flow through a whole host of ideas and you say, hey, it's going to cost us $110 per test is what the average happens to be, well, you're market competitive. If you get it to $70 per test, you're definitely market competitive. If you can drop it down to $50 or what the state's currently paying, which is $20.87 per specimen collection, then you're like rock solid. But at least you have a chance to say that we're investing in ourselves. And here's the extra diligence that we went through to say that we were investing in ourselves. I feel as though that may answer some of Justin's point, it may answer some of Katie's point, and it definitively supports what the chairman had just said is, hey, we have a ton of expertise, we're willing to help you, but at the bare bones minimum, as you guys have thought about it, how much is it gonna cost? And that's all I'll say on that, Mr. Chairman.
Sean, my figures I came up with, just to kind of answer that, I'm looking with cost and as well as the test for the lab results and everything, it's about $150 to $2 per test. However, that's if we were doing it individually, which is why I think it's more cost effective to just send them individuals up the street to Health Express. But if we're looking at doing a larger group, that number is going to slide because the labor costs versus the amount of tests we're doing, that's when the savings is going to come into place. Because we're going to be able to do multiple tests within that hour as opposed to just somebody coming in for an hour to do 1 or 2 tests. If we're doing, we're gearing up for a moderate test. We're not looking to turn any hand over. I want to be crystal clear on this to this committee and to the residents of Abington. Abington Fire does not have the capacity to do massive testing like you're seeing at Massasoit or at South Weymouth or in some of the larger towns. We simply cannot do it. We're looking to add a service to try to help keep essential services, essential government in Abington going and minimize that quarantine. If it's not cost effective, it's not cost effective. I'm not looking to retool my entire department, do a massive task that I simply don't have the manpower to do. So we've got to be very, very clear on that. We're looking to supplement to try to get employees tested and get them back to work sooner than we can. If it's not cost effective, we'll just drop this and continue going to Health Express, that's fine. I think we're missing an opportunity because I think that we are able to do some things, but I'm not looking to do a massive testing thing. There's no way, it's simply not going to work for this department.
Chief, I think that's great. So you just gave the high watermark of $150 per test. So that's great. Now the work is on what is the efficiency model? What's the low end number? And then what is the anticipated total volume? I don't think that's a heavy lift. I really don't. I think that if, a quick phone call between the parties on the call, Scott, Sue, and yourself, and maybe one other on this committee, we can quickly answer those questions, and you can kind of push that back into this group and say, hey, this is exactly what we have. Because you already hit the high watermark, and Chris, I'll give it back to you.
It's the number of tests, that's the unknown. We don't know how many employees we're going to have to test. Unless you have a formula that's out there, but we don't.
We assume everyone's going to be tested once and just say there's X amount of employees in town, and I mean, everybody has COVID until proven otherwise. So if you're doing it for lack of quarantine, if someone in Sue's department comes in and is COVID positive and she has like 15 people in her department, and she's having them all or is she going to have them all tested? Like, is that the idea of the program? I mean,
Yeah, it's not just to do a baseline test. It's as either the symptomatic or if there's a contact trace
so you're
due
going
to
to
an
contact
exposure.
trace, and then you're going to test them at days.
No. We're not. If it was a result of a question, if I have an employee or the police have an employee, the DPW have employees that are quarantined because either they've been contact traced or whatever, if we're able to provide a rapid test for them to try to get them back to work, that's what we're looking for. That's all. We're not looking to test everybody. We're not looking to do a baseline test of all employees in town. That's not what this is.
And one of the things the chief did say at the beginning, for the benefit of both Katie and Sean, is they're looking more for the essential and frontline town employees. So I would guess probably not just to choose
I apologize.
one of the departments more.
All town.
More.
At some point,
Yeah,
I said
no.
all town employees. So
But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, too. I think Katie was saying that you could assume, when trying to figure out how many tests you might need, that you could, were you saying, Katie, that you could assume that you would have to test every employee at least once?
Well, I guess outside of police and fire, who else in town is deemed an essential employee? Town manager, I'm assuming.
Town manager. The Department of
It
Public.
could be a
Works.
lot of, it could be any departments. I mean,
Yeah.
I think every department's
DPW,
essential.
If the department had an essential employee,
The
like,
vice chairman of the finance committee.
You certainly got at least a couple hundred people that at any given point in time, if you had to do that whole group. But, remember also that if the CARES Act did get extended, this conversation goes away.
Right.
Because we'd be able to recoup this money anyways. So the thing is this is really just sort of the worst case scenario. If we really had to do this, we'd be coming to you anyways. But it may be after the fact and say, look, we needed to get a lot of people done real quick. These guys were able to do it. And this is what, we end up running into. And it's mostly going to be overtime costs and lab fees, I'm guessing.
All right, so 25,000 was a number Sue threw out, I think, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's about 150 to 200 people tests. Based
Yeah, but
on
I think that's a bad calculation though, because, well, sorry, Chris, are you using the maximum amount of, if Chief Duddle's department did one test, is that the value you're using to back into that number?
No, that's why there's a range, is 150 to 200.
I have to clarify something though. If we're doing a large testing things, I'm gonna need 3 or 4 firefighters to establish that testing thing. And it depends, so that labor cost goes up, and then it depends on the number of people we could be testing on it. It's kind of a sliding scale, I think. It's not a simple, divide 25,000 by whatever.
But I'm just roughly trying to get an idea of, we commit 25,000, as other people have said. We don't just want to commit 25,000 and find out that only does 50 tests. But from what you said, we think it's somewhere between 150 to 200, depending on how many are done at the same time. There'll be 200 if you do 5 at a time. It'll be 150 if you do 1 at a time.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the question, right? So what's the floor, right? So you have 10. Are you saying, sorry, that's not enough? Go to the Health Express? Is
what I'm
it
trying to
20?
get
Is it
to
50?
Yeah. What I'm trying to get to is, do we want to commit 25,000 based on what we know, just to have that capability, so that we have the capability in the immediate future? Then, as Matt said, have a more of a more fleshed out proposal of cost, as Joe is saying, and others, before we go further. But at least that way, if something happened tomorrow, or actually something happened January 2nd, then we have some capability there to handle it. If we needed more and we found it, then we'd know a little better what the costs really are.
But
So
I
the
think it's a
other
good idea,
question,
Chris.
sorry, the other question based on what Scott was just saying is, do we essentially make kind of like a verbal commitment that we would cover this if you're doing it and the CARES Act is not extended, but not commit a specific amount, and when you're doing it and when you need it, you do it, and then you come back to us for to essentially recoup the cost, and we look at the reserve fund at that point within
Right.
certain parameters, obviously. Not
And
going
I
to
think-
recoup like $1 million, but
I think
Get
to
an
the
idea
chief's
how much it
point,
costs, that would work, but we don't.
so
I think to the chief's point is that if he thinks he can get it cheaper by sending them out, he's not going to do it in-house and waste the money.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
as we
and I don't think any of us think
with
that he's going to do
as
that.
we've talked about in the past with the paving and things like that, it's like, well, why didn't you come to us first? Well, we're coming to you first. So give us
Yep.
the money so we can set it aside. And if we don't need it, the chief's not going to use it. He knows what his parameters are. He knows if he can go to Health Express for something cheaper, he's not going to do it in-house.
Can I ask
I don't
how
want,
many?
I don't
how
want the
many-
money. I want Sue to hold the money. I don't want the money.
No,
Seriously,
I know you don't
That's
want the
just
money.
be a
You want
line
me
item
to
that
have
we're
the money.
drawing from. So
How many tests have we had to do in?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to ask. So in the last 10 months of the pandemic, how many tests have we had to? Have we done groups of tests with the fire department and police department already? Has it happened often?
the fire department's been individuals. Over the last 10 months, we've done probably, I'm guessing 15 to 20, because we've had some multiple tests on the same people.
Okay.
That's an estimate, top of my head. It has not been clusters, it's been individuals.
Okay, so it theoretically,
Right.
like we could use that as a baseline for how many we might need in the near future, right?
Right, and the police has had at least a half a dozen or more that I know about. I'm not privy to all of that. And we've done 4 in the town hall, council on aging, and library at least in the last month or so. So
Yeah,
there
but
has been,
that's not 200 tests though. I mean,
Right.
we're talking
The,
like
the,
less
the
than 50.
variable has changed, however, and again, I know I have 2 experts on here that may agree, disagree, but throughout most of the year, the late spring to the summer and fall, everything was still kind of open, meaning physically the windows were open. Everything's enclosed right now. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing another spike again. The cold weather's here, everybody's internal in a building, the heat's on, the windows are closed. That's different from what we've had the last 9 months on this. Sean and Katie may have different facts to either agree or disagree with me, but the common sense, that's what we're seeing. So that's another variable that we have not seen throughout this pandemic for the first 9 months. So I don't know, that may be driving different things. We're seeing entire school systems now that are having large numbers, not just Abington, but in the area. You might start to see larger clusters coming up.
So question to the committee, does it make sense for us to set aside a specific sum of money? And the one that we've most frequently discussed was $25,000, or something similar to that right now, to say this can be used after January 1st if the CARES Act isn't extended, as needed based on the town's needs, the chief's needs, his plan, their determination, and obviously still working on whatever details are. Like Sean said, we definitely trust the chief and his judgment, and the way that he spends the town's money has always been very judicious. He's a good steward of the money given to him. Do we set something aside right now, or do we look to do it more in the sense of coming to us as costs have been expended, and we then go to the reserve fund and cover those costs after the fact?
I personally am more in favor of having a certain amount, whether it's $25,000 or having a specific amount and then revisiting, rather than kind of waiting and I don't know, I'm just more comfortable with having a specific amount. And then I'm also looking at the fact that today is the 16th of December. And we probably aren't going to be meeting much before December 30th, and that's when the CARES Act runs out. So I feel more comfortable with setting an amount and then revisiting it, you know, who knows what'll happen between now and a month from now, when we will be meeting again.
And we can
agree with that.
set an amount and basically give you periodic updates. It's not like we, you know,
Absolutely.
we'd say this is what happened this past 2 weeks, or whenever you guys meet again, we can give you updates on where we're at, whether we even needed it, or, you know, anything like that. I'm sure John feels the same way as I do, is that we're amenable to give you any information that you guys want.
We may not even touch this in the next month, to be honest with you. We may not do anything. We're just trying to be proactive, looking ahead on this, not quite sure where this is going. We're trying to give you ideas, but in order to
for all we
act
know,
on those ideas, we need the funding.
for all we know, as we've said several times, the CARES Act could either be extended or replaced with something else that provides funding for something like this. We don't know, but I do think it's better to prepare. So, does anyone else have any thoughts on that before I ask for a motion?
And I want to make sure, I know, right now you're just talking mainly the frontline fire, police, and other essential. The schools are not included in this right now, even though obviously the school has a problem.
Possibly. We did have some initial talks with the school. If the original talks we had were, let's say, you know, we're able to put this tool together. If we're able to put this tool together, meaning the testing, who may be interested at that point in using the tool? So we included the schools as well as the police on that initially. And there was some potential interest. You know, we haven't created the tool yet.
Okay.
So theoretically, yeah, possibly the schools could be one of those groups that we do. My suggestion may be that if you do vote on a sum of funds to be put aside for this, it's not just for the fire department. You may want to amend it or title it that it could be used for any, you know, town employees to be tested, whether it's through the fire department doing it, whether it's going to a private vendor, whether there's another product out there that we're not aware about tonight that may be available to us after the first year, who knows? So I'd suggest you may not want to just have this geared for the fire department, but gear it towards just the town testing, town employee testing in general, that, you know, the accountant's office can utilize as needed.
I thought that was wise as well.
Good thought.
Just one thought, and this is not related to that, but kind of based off of what you said, kind of a callback to earlier in the discussion. You were mentioning that in your stations you don't have a place to set up like a testing the way that Hanover does. Would there be a place in another town building that could potentially fit the bill?
We're looking at a couple of different testing sites, and I'm saying this on the eve of a snowstorm, and I'm not sure if they'd be plowed out because they're currently vacant buildings. Possibly Center School and North School may be an ideal drive-through site. Probably Center School better because of traffic, but we're not sure. That could change drastically tomorrow morning, depending on what the conditions are like outside. We'd be looking at setting up we've got the incident support trailer that the fire department has, the large black trailer. Basically, it's a large office on wheels. That would really be the logistics point, not to have patients go in there. That would be a cold zone point. The warm zone would be a firefighter paramedic between that site, and they're probably entering records at that point, over to the actual tester, who's the hot site, in, you know, fully geared up on that as cars would come up. So there's a couple locations in town, I think, that we could do that, but that is an example of one of the ones we were considering.
Okay.
If that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely. And it was just a thought that came to me while we were discussing. So I wanted to share it. All right, without any further questions there, does anyone want to put forth a motion?
Motion to set aside $25,000 for testing. I don't know if that's enough information, but
So would it be something, Sue, correct me if I'm wrong on this, procedurally, Sue or Scott, actually, or Sean, would it be something to the effect of to transfer from the reserve fund $25,000 for the purposes of in-house COVID testing to be transferred to, would it be the town accountant? Where would
I
we
would just say like a special,
special fund?
a special account number to be overseen by the town accountant or overseen by the fire chief, however you guys want to put that.
Town
Or
accountant.
actually, you could actually put it by overseen by jointly by the both of us, so that we are working together to make sure that these funds are being spent to your purposes.
I agree with that.
Did you get all that, Justin?
I have to say it out loud now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You can just say ditto and I'll give you a second.
Ditto. I'm in.
I second.
So Justin makes a motion to transfer from the reserve fund the sum of $25,000 to a special account to be jointly overseen by the town accountant and the fire chief for the purposes of COVID testing.
Yes, sir.
And Barbara seconds it.
Yes.
Just writing it down in my notes to make sure I have that. That's how I have those words, Justin. All right. Is there any further discussion on the motion put forth by Justin? Without any, all those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? All those abstaining? It is passed with 1 no and 1 abstention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for your time and effort.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, folks. Merry Christmas. if I don't see you.
Yeah, Merry
Merry
Christmas to you
Christmas.
too.
Good night, John.
All right, I will bring the agenda back up.
I'm sorry. I have to go to work.
Yep, sorry, Barbara. I thought
Sorry about that.
didn't necessarily think we were going to take nearly as long as we did on that. So, all right, moving to the more procedural parts of our agenda for tonight. So you'd like to get a status on a few things from Scott and Sue. The status of where we're at with the FY21 budget and revenue receipts, etc. Status on free cash and status on where we're at with the FY22 draft budget. Whatever order you guys want to take those in.
I'll defer to Sue on all of the above.
Thanks a lot.
I thought we're getting there.
It's very chivalrous of you, Scott.
So the FY21 budget and revenue. So we're obviously expending our budget, but there's things that are going over that, which are being covered by the CARES. So if you want to talk about what stuff we're spending and what's being charged to CARES, I can go over those numbers as well. Where it comes to revenues, we're obviously below expectations. When we ended June 30th of last year, we were short almost $700,000 in our expected revenues just in local receipts alone. Most of it was in Medicare reimbursements because the schools were closed, meals receipts. There was a few other things, motor vehicle excise, so people obviously weren't working, and so we gave them some leniency on paying their things a little bit late. It has caught up in the new year, but the things that you can see the closures, building permits and meals and Medicare reimbursement, tax title, like late fees and interest. We're not pushing to go after people who can't afford to pay their taxes because they're out of work. So, we're usually hot and heavy on making sure people pay those things, but we also have some common decency to understand that there's a lot of people still out of work right now. So hopefully we don't close down again and our revenues can start going back up. And we're not sure what the state's going to do going forward, if they're going to do any 94C cuts. So that it's still an iffy. We really don't know how we're going to look at the end of the year.
Do we have any kind of like ballpark of where we're tracking as of right now, or?
I don't. I am not in charge of the revenue portion of it. It has to come to me through the department. So unless the departments turn it over to the treasurer's office enters it and then sends it over to me. So right now we're not closed. We have the month of July and the month of August closed. So it all depends on how the treasurer's office is getting these receipts from the departments and how the flow of the money comes in. So the money's in the bank, but it's not necessarily on the books.
So
Obviously, go ahead, Chris.
from what I heard, you said that as of when we closed the books on June 20th, we were $700,000 worse.
We were $700,000 less than what we estimated for the budget for FY20.
So 700,000 worse.
Yes.
That was part of what we made up with the special
extra,
town meeting funds.
Exactly.
The extra money from the state that we were not estimating for.
So we actually got like almost $1 million more from the state, but we only were able to use $500,000 of that because we had to supplement our revenues from what we didn't make in June to make up the
money
tax
that we got last year from the state.
Yes, for
fiscal year 20.
So in fiscal year 20,
for
they told
fiscal
us to
year
cut back
21.
10%. And then when they gave us more, we didn't come in with the revenues that we needed to make the tax rate. So we needed to use some of what they gave us. And then the rest of what they gave us, we split it up between the schools and the other articles that we had in November.
So we used fiscal year 21 dollars to cover our shortfall beginning of the year.
Fiscal year 21 dollars that were not budgeted for.
50.
Okay.
FY21. It wasn't. Yeah. So you have FY20. You ended at a certain dollar amount, and with FY21, when you're setting the tax rate, you can't go over 1% of what you ended at the year before. So we had to use the excess money to cover the tax rate because we couldn't go over what we ended with. If anybody wants to come in my office and I can show it to them on paper, it will be more explainable than what I'm saying now. But it's definitely what they gave us and what we had to set, how we had to set the tax rate. It's convoluted, but I can show it to you on paper.
Just a little worrisome.
Yes, and we're not trending much better because again we opened restaurants and things like that, but like the last month, it looks like we're gonna be closing again. So we look like we might be going into the same trend.
Yeah, I
In
think
the next 6
the
months that we
entire
have
economic
left.
times look
Yeah.
troublesome. So,
Correct.
all right, free cash.
Free cash, I'm working on. It has not been sent to the DOR because it's more important for our deadlines for the Plymouth County CARES to get reimbursement there, and that's very time consuming for one person to have to compile all this information. We have to date requested $2.2 million in reimbursements from Plymouth County CARES. Well, not completely, because 600,000 is outstanding purchase orders from the school, but 2.2 is what we are looking at getting back. And I've put in my 4th submission. I just submitted it today. And from what they've earmarked for us, we have about $385,000 left that we can submit for reimbursements, but the invoices all need to be dated for December 30th in order to get reimbursed for. So free cash is going, but CARES is more important. Because I have until March 30th to get free cash in before it affects us. And when I say it affects us, it just means that they're going to hold off on our 3rd quarter state aid until I get it in, but I will get it in by that time.
But do we need to know free, not that I'm saying you know what you're doing, but in terms of order, but do we need to know free cash before we know what we can spend the rest of this year?
No. So we usually use free cash for capital items.
Capital.
So,
We need it before town meeting.
yeah. So
We're setting the capital amounts for this coming year.
Yeah, we're looking at about $700,000 in free cash, unless they take account for what we spent in COVID that we hadn't gotten reimbursed for by June 30th. And I think we're covered with that. Maybe a couple $1,000 that they didn't cover for slight reasons. But you guys did a transfer anyway, and I think it was September or October, to cover those things that they didn't take care of. But yeah, free cash is not a issue when it comes to setting the budget. We just use that for capital items.
But we assumed a certain amount of free cash when we set the fiscal year 21 budget. And if we have less than that, does that mean we need to cut expenses?
I'm sorry, does that mean what?
I think when we set the fiscal year 21 budget back in June or whatever it was, we had an assumption of what free cash would be starting the year.
That was the
But that
prior
was
year.
free cash for the
prior year.
previous fiscal year.
Yes.
I'm not explaining myself well. There's a certain amount of money in the coffers, and if we don't have as much as we thought, then we can't spend it.
So free cash works like I get it let's say I get it certified tomorrow, and at town meeting we vote to use, let's say we have 700,000 and we vote to use 600,000 for capital items or whatever for the meeting in the spring. We use that money, I set it aside, and then we close the books and we certify a new free cash come the following fall. So one pretty much has nothing to do with the other. It once you close it and you say, we use this money and now this is what we have, and this is our revenues that came in, these are expenditures that we didn't use, you have a new free cash number for the following year.
Yeah, I guess I'm just not understanding, but that's all right. I don't want to take everyone's
So Chris, I think I can maybe help explain it. We'll see. So the free cash that we were talking about leading into town meeting in June was the free cash that was certified in the previous, like December timeframe.
Yeah.
And that was the free cash from closing out the books on FY19. So closing out not the year we were in when
Yeah.
it closed, or the year we were doing for the next town meeting, the one from the previous one. So right now, the free cash that Sue is talking about closing out is the FY20 free cash. So for
Yes.
last year, like ending on June 30th, like that budget's free cash. And that money we would use, in theory at least, at the, like, for capital type items, not for budgetary items, at the town meeting that we will have next spring is when we would be looking to spend that specific money.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm still not getting it, but that's
Okay.
just me, I guess. So I'm just trying to relate it to real money, but maybe that's my mistake. Um,
It's not real money, but again, if you want to come in my office, I can show you exactly how it works. So
Yeah.
right now we're working on closing 20, setting FY 20 tax rate, and working on FY 22 budget. So
Yeah.
we're constantly, every year, we're working within multiple years at the November to October to December time period. But I'd be more than happy
still go
to.
back to, I'm still trying to convert this to a P&L statement, profit and loss.
It's totally not the same.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, I think the closest thing that I equate it to is essentially a tax return, like a federal tax return or a state tax return.
Okay.
Like, free cash would be the money you get back in your tax return.
So obviously you have an accounting degree through a college, right? And so do I. In that time that I was in college, there was one chapter on municipal government.
No, I
So-
don't have an accounting degree. I worked in finance for 30 years.
Okay, so you know about P&Ls and stuff, but it's completely not the same in municipal government. It really isn't. But I welcome you to, even if you want to take a weekend, I know you work during the week and stuff. If you want to take a weekend, I welcome you to set some time aside and ask me to come in, and I'll explain how these things work. That I know you and Joe are fairly new, and even Greg, that you guys don't understand that this is not corporate world.
But there's still
It's so different.
money comes in and money goes out, and that's what I don't see. That's what I'm not, and I appreciate your offer, because I think that's
right, because we're not on a cash accrual basis. We're like on a modified something or other in municipality. I can't even explain it, but it is interesting once you get in there and you look at how things work.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, like free cash is a retained earnings, but really it's not, because when you say retained earnings, it's at the end of your, when you file your taxes, you have that money. Free cash, I had a teacher and he said free cash isn't really free cash. It's just a number that they give you because you can show that you didn't spend your warrants. I mean, your articles and your encumbrances didn't come in as much as you expended, and your revenues and your expenditures, and there's more to it than just I took in X and I spent X.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. Good questions, Chris. All right. FY22 draft budget. Where do we stand?
So we have a preliminary budget with the department request. We're not looking very good, obviously, again, because we can only take our last year's local receipts and increase them by 1%. I kind of pushed it a little bit and increased it by an average of the last 3 years. And we don't know where the state's coming in at. So I have two scenarios. One is the state's going to tell us we need to do a 10% cut, or the state's going to tell us that they're going to level fund us from what they gave us, including the new money that they gave us for the fall town meeting. And both of those look pretty meek. So we have some work to do. I know that there's additional departmental requests, and Scott and I are going to talk about where we can go with that. But it's definitely not going to bring us to the number that we need to level fund. So it's going to be a struggle. I don't remember a couple, 4, 5, 6 years ago, D'Agostino was leaving and we were at a $3 million deficit, and we managed to close the budget. I'm not saying it's that bad, but it is to the point where we need to do some crossing out of figures and hopefully getting people to agree that they don't need what they're requesting. Correct, Scott?
Yeah, it is going to be a challenge, to say the least. And, I do know, I think Sean Cronin had mentioned yesterday on a conference call that some of the preliminary cherry sheet numbers will be coming out probably tomorrow, but, they're so preliminary at this point. I don't even know how much we would trust them. But yeah, I mean, we're going to have to really tighten our belt and go through this with all the departments, and really it's going to be a lot of disappointment. I hate to say it, but we're just starting now with some of the unions with some negotiations too. But, that's actually, most of those would be the following year before we'd see any, whatever the effects of those are going to be. So really right now, some of us, we're putting in contractual obligations that, that we're kind of stuck with.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any good news. Put it that way.
I think given where we've been at for the last 10 months, I don't think anyone was expecting good news. So does anyone have questions about any of those last 3 topics? Other than Chris's continued questions about free cash.
Well, what you just said about the draft budget, that jives with what I'm understanding about what's happening. So
Yes.
now I'm happy.
Chris, seriously, come see me.
Yes, I will. After the new year.
Anyone else with questions?
I have a
Comments?
question. If we're going on past this.
Yes.
Okay. So who's been taking the minutes of the meetings?
Joe has been working on the meeting minutes.
Okay, because I have we took a couple votes. One of them was for the gas station pumps. So I need to do the journal entries, but I need the backup of the minutes of the meetings in order to attach it to, this is why I made those journal entries. So if Joe could send me the minutes of the last couple meetings, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll go back and I've been relying on the recordings to go back and type them up. So I'll see what we're missing and go back. Do you know if you can pinpoint the date? I'll focus on that because I know we have more than just probably the last few.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the last meeting or the meeting before that, but we took a vote to add money to the highway department for their software for the gas pumps. That's the one I need.
Do you have a rough guess there, Matt?
I will look it up. I'll look it up.
Okay.
Checking
And
the,
then
the previous agendas. Hang on.
And then when do you need that by, Sue?
It doesn't matter. Just within a couple of weeks. I know Jack has already spent the money on the software, and I told him to just put it in a certain line item. So I need to create a line item for him for us to transfer that expense to.
Okay.
So I think that was at the October 28th meeting.
It was. I just looked it up as well. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
And Sue, I've been taking the notes on this one, and I'll get those posted
Okay,
for tonight's, because I know we have the vote for the reserve fund
yes,
on this one.
and you got the agendas for the finance committee meetings
Those are all posted on
awesome.
on the website. Yeah.
With the budget guys, the
Yeah.
department budgets.
Oh, sorry, the schedule.
Yes,
Yes. Did I pass that email on to everybody?
I
I can't remember if I did.
don't,
I just want to make sure everything was okay for everybody.
I want to say no, but I may have been kind of.
Don't think so. I don't think we've received it.
I did not send that. It doesn't look like. Hold on.
I
one
did send
second.
it to you though, Matt, right?
Yeah, you did send it to me. I have it. I just haven't. I almost always send everything on right away. That one's, and we're a good 9 days past you sending it to me, and I haven't sent it out. So I apologize on that. I will send that out momentarily.
There's only a couple, like on the days, a couple departments wanted to change their times earlier, like the shorter department. So I told them that we would do that on that day. But
Yep, I
the
did get a
departments-
message. I did get one message on that about DPW and Council on Aging.
Yeah, so I did say that's fine, we'll change it on the day, but other than that, everybody's okay with the days I gave them.
I am going, okay, that's good. I'm going to send that to the committee right now. All right, I sent that. All right. Anything else there that anyone has? Okay, the rest of our agenda, do we have any liaison reports? Do not have, sorry, we do not have any correspondence that I've gotten. Minutes, we will have more written up as we just discussed. We'll have more written up as of our next meeting to go over. We don't have a next meeting scheduled. When you see the email that was just sent, the start of department head meetings, we're looking at January 20th. We'll want to meet before that, whether it's the 13th or the 6th, to go over what the preliminary budget is before we start getting into that. So I'm going to guess January 6th will likely be our next meeting, but I'll send that information out to everyone. So does anyone have anything else? Oh, sorry, Justin, what was that?
This sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
A
Second.
motion and a second. All those in favor? Opposed? All right. Thank you all. Good work tonight. Appreciate it.
Tomorrow, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good night.